Thursday 16th. Fresh breezes between the northwest and southwest and fair weather. At 1 p.m, having got within the group of islands which lies of the north head of Mercury Bay, hauled our wind to the northward, and kept plying to windward all the day between these islands and some others laying to the northward of them, with a view to get under the main land, the extreme northwest point of which we could see at noon bore west by north, distant 6 or 8 leagues. Latitude in per observation 36 degrees 33 minutes south. Note, in speaking of Mercury Bay, I had forgot to mention that the mangrove trees found there produce a resinous substance very much like rosin. Something of this kind, I am told, is found in both the East and West Indies. We found it at first in small lumps upon the sea beach, but afterwards found it sticking to the mangrove trees, and by that means found out from whence it came. Friday 17th. The fore and middle parts had fresh gales between the southwest and west by south, and squally. Kept plying to windward in order to get under the land. At 6 a.m, fetched close under the lee of the northernmost island in sight, then tacked and stood to the southward until 11, when we tacked and stood to the northward. At this time, the north head of Mercury Bay, or Point Mercury, bore southeast by east, distant 3 leagues, being at this time between 2 and 3 leagues from the mainland, and abreast of a place where there appeared to be a harbour. But the heavy squalls which we had from the land would not permit us to take a nearer view of it, but soon brought us under our close-reefed topsails. At noon, Point Mercury bore southeast, distant 4 leagues, and the weathermost point of the mainland in sight bore north 60 degrees west, distant 5 leagues. Over the northwest side of Mercury Bay is a pretty high round hill, rising sloping from the shore of the bay. This hill is very conspicuous from where we now are. Saturday 18th. First part strong gales at southwest and south-southwest, with heavy squalls. In the morning had gentle breezes at south and southeast. Towards noon had whiffling light airs all round the compass. Kept plying to windward under close reefed topsails until daylight, at which time we had got close under the main, and, the wind coming at southeast, we made sail and steered northwest by west as the land lays, keeping close inshore. At 6 we passed a small bay, wherein there appeared to be an anchorage, and pretty good shelter from the sea winds, at the entrance of which lies a rock pretty high above water. 4 miles farther to the west-northwest is a very conspicuous promontory or point of land, which we got abreast of about 7 o'clock. It lies in the latitude of 36 degrees 26 minutes south, and north 48 degrees west, 9 leagues from Point Mercury. From this point the land trends west half south near 1 league, then south-southeast as far as we could see. Besides the islands laying without us, we could see land round by the southwest as far as northwest, but whether this was the main or islands was not possible for us at this time to determine. The fear of losing the main land determined me to follow its direction. With this view we hauled round the point and steered to the southward, but meeting with whiffling light airs all round the compass, we made but little progress until noon, when we found ourselves by observation in the latitude of 36 degrees 29 minutes south. A small island which lays northwest 4 miles from the promontory above mentioned bore north by east, distant 6.5 miles, being at this time about 2 miles from the shore. While we lay under the land, 2 large canoes came off to us. In one of them were 62 people. They stayed about us some time, then began to throw stones into the ship. upon which I fired a musket ball through one of the canoes. After this they retired ashore. Sunday 19th. At 1 p.m. a breeze sprung up at east, which afterwards came to north-east, and with it we steered along shore south by east and south-south-east, having from 25 to 18 fathoms water. At 7:30, having run 7 or 8 leagues since noon, we anchored in 23 fathoms, not choosing to run any farther in the dark, having the land on both sides of us forming the entrance of a strait, bay or river, lying in south by east, for on that point of the compass we could see no land. At daylight a.m., the wind being still favourable, we weighed and run under an easy sail up the inlet, keeping nearest the east side. Soon after we had got under sail, 3 large canoes came off to the ship, and several of the people came on board upon the very first invitation. This was owing to their having heard of our being upon the coast and the manner we had treated the natives. I made each of those that came on board a small present, and after about an hour's stay they went away well satisfied. After having run 5 leagues from the place where we anchored last night, our depth of water gradually decreased to 6 fathoms, and into less I did not choose to go, and as the wind blew right up the inlet and tide of flood, we came to an anchor nearly in the middle of the channel, which is here about 11 miles over, and after this sent 2 boats to sound, the one on one side and the other on the other side. Monday 20th. Moderate breezes at south-southeast and fair weather. At 2 p.m. the boats returned from sounding, not having found above 3 feet more water than where we now lay. Upon this I resolved to go no farther with the ship, but to examine the head of the bay in the boat, for as it appeared to run a good way inland, I thought this a good opportunity to see a little of the interior part of the country and its produce. Accordingly, at daylight in the morning, I set out with the pinnace and longboat, accompanied by Mr. Banks, Dr. Solander, and Tupia. We found the inlet end in a river about 9 miles above the ship, into which we entered with the first of the flood, and before we had gone 3 miles up it, found the water quite fresh. We saw a number of natives and landed at one of their villages, the inhabitants of which received us with open arms. We made but a short stay with them, but proceeded up the river until near noon, when, finding the face of the country to continue pretty much the same, and no alteration in the course or stream of the river, or the least probability of seeing the end of it, we landed on the west side in order to take a view of the lofty trees which adorn its banks, being at this time 12 or 14 miles within the entrance, and here the tide of flood runs as strong as it does in the river Thames below Bridge. Tuesday 21st. After landing, as above mentioned, we had not gone 100 yards into the woods before we found a tree that girted 19 feet 8 inches, 6 feet above the ground, and having a quadrant with me, I found its length from the root to the first branch to be 89 feet. It was as straight as an arrow, and tapered but very little in proportion to its length, so that I judged that there were 356 solid feet of timber in this tree clear of the branches. We saw many others of the same sort, several of which were taller than the one we measured, and all of them very stout. There were likewise many other sorts of very stout timber trees, all of them wholly unknown to any of us. We brought away a few specimens, and at 3 o'clock we embarked in order to return on board with the very first of the ebb, but not before we had named this river the Thames, on account of its bearing some resemblance to that river in England. In our return down the river, the inhabitants of the village where we landed in going, seeing that we returned by another channel, put off in their canoes, and met us and trafficked with us in the most friendly manner imaginable, until they had disposed of the few trifles they had. The tide of ebb just carried us out of the narrow part of the river into the sea reach, as I may call it, where meeting with the flood and a strong breeze at north-northwest obliged us to come to a grapnel, and we did not reach the ship until 7 o'clock in the a.m. Intending to get under sail at high water, the longboat was sent to take up the kedge anchor, but it blowed so strong that she could not reach the buoy, and the gale increasing soon obliged us to veer away more cable and strike topgallant yards.